Molly, thank you so much for taking time. Let's dig into Orb Media and what you're doing with Orb Media, because it's very interesting when we look at the broader scale and also referring to the current situation of the COVID outbreak. And speaking of, what did the COVID outbreak bring to your attention again?
Yeah, I think as a living in the United States, the thing that it made clear and present for me was the social inequality that we have in this country in particular, and how decisions that have been made over the last few decades have impacted the kinds of safety nets that's available for workers in this country who can't work remotely and who are on hourly wage and maybe don't have sick leave, paid sick leave. So I think the decisions that we've made in the last few decades as a country have shown up in pretty dramatic effect now with COVID-19 and the inequality that is being experienced now, clearly around who gets sick and who's dying. And I think we're still understanding why, but for sure some of the most economically challenged parts of our society are getting sick at a higher rate and dying at a higher rate. And I think that's a troubling thing to reflect on in this society. And I am feeling incredibly blessed and lucky to, be able to continue to work and do what we're doing and during this time, because I think that's definitely not the case here in the United States with a lot of people.
You founded Orb Media and built up its international member network of media outlets, right? With the intent to kind of leverage the so-called collective and to be able to simultaneously publish about critical issues such as COVID that affects then billions of people around the world. And you really wanted to kind of find a new way to inform and engage with people on a local level about those issues. And also when I looked at your website, the whole way how you present your work is basically pretty much aligned with the global sustainable development goals of the United Nations. And in 2018, you have published 6 investigative stories, and one was probably everyone by now knows about them. The story back then was about microplastic that was found in plastic bottles all over the world, but also in the ocean. Can you maybe describe what kind of impact the story had, and also what kind of data insights you won based on the way of how you presented it and published it?
Yeah. So you're right. There was a lot of microplastic and plastic in the oceans. That research was actually done by other organizations and existing when we started ours. And what was also starting to show up was microplastic in freshwater sources. And so actually this research, there's a kind of 2 parts to this project that we worked on. And the first part was a simple question, which was, if it's in fresh water and it's there because it's not being filtered out from washing machines that are dumping plastics through the washing process into our sewer and septic systems, and they're being discharged into fresh water, are they able to filter them out in the uptake of our drinking water? So that was the kind of core question that then triggered 3 years of work. There was a great article in the New York Times a long time ago in 2013 with a researcher who was testing the Great Lakes in the United States for microplastics. And we reached out to her and asked her whether there was any research about that, about tap water, and there wasn't. And we asked her to design a study that would allow us to collect water samples from around the world from people's taps and have them tested in her lab. And so that was the first kind of phase of this project. And those results, we took, I think more than 150 tap water samples from like 14 cities and municipalities on every continent, all on 5 continents. And the analysis showed that 80% of them had microplastic fibers in them, which are obviously tied to the textile industry. And so we decided to publish that with partners. And I think there's an evolution of our understanding of how media can work in this story as well, which is that my original aspiration intent was a little bit old school, like, oh, Orb will do this reporting and we'll publish it and everyone will know. And the world has moved on. And so I decided that instead of trying to build an audience ourselves, that the best thing to do would be to share what we learned with a group of media around the world who had audiences themselves and had quality reputations for presenting information, and to partner with them. And so that was what we did. And in 2017, we published the tap water research with, I think, 10 media partners around the world in multiple languages. And that was crazy. I had no idea what to expect. And like, it had just come together kind of quickly, and it had a real impact, and impact that I hadn't quite imagined was possible. People everywhere were seeing the story, they were talking about it, and it really catalyzed a conversation around the world about how we manufacture plastic, how we use it, and how we dispose of it. And I think the key for that story and that information and what made it successful was taking something that felt remote to each of us, which had usually, like, the Pacific garbage patch, you know, has plastic, a lot of plastic. And maybe if I eat fish, I'm getting a little plastic when I eat fish. But that, you know, in the scale of things we worry about, didn't seem like a big deal. I think what this research revealed to people was that plastic, little pieces of plastic that we cannot see, are everywhere around us in the water that we have and we drink. And we had a lot of people say, oh, but I don't drink tap water, I use bottled water, or, you know, I drink wine, I drink beer, right? Great responses. I think what they weren't thinking was, you use tap water to make your coffee in the morning, you use tap water to boil the pasta for your kids or the broccoli for dinner, right? We use tap water all the time to bathe in, to brush our teeth, right? When you're lucky enough to live in an environment that has safe drinking water. So I think connecting this sort of global phenomena that could seem remote to not only our individual health, but our individual action and behavior about how we consume plastic and dispose of it, I think was one of the things that was massively powerful and impactful about that, as far as like, how do you tell a story that moves people to action? So I think that was key. And then, because a lot of people said, well, I drink bottled water, the natural follow-up question was, well, how about bottled water? So we actually designed a second study with the same researcher and tested 250 bottles from 11 major brands, most of them global brands that distribute around the world, and some of them big brands in countries where there's a lot of population, like China and India and Mexico. And we found that 93% of the bottles had microplastic particles in them this time, not just fibers, but we were looking at particles. And some of them as many as 10,000 microparticles per liter, right? Which is just a lot of plastic. And, you know, in an industry that is marketing itself on purity, largely, we thought that was really important and relevant. We still, as a human society, don't know what consuming plastic does to us health-wise, but the reason to care is that there is research that shows that microplastic, like chemicals, adhere to microplastic, and a lot of the chemicals that adhere the most often are carcinogens, and they release under warm temperatures, basically when they're ingested, right? Those chemicals release. So even if the plastic itself isn't bad for you, some of what it might be carrying, particularly from freshwater sources, it could be problematic. So we published that in March of 2018 with about, gosh, I think 12 or 14 partners, media partners, again, across platforms and across languages and across different kinds of media. And that really ignited a global conversation that was really what we hoped for, which was, okay, we have a problem. How are we going to manage that problem? And what does this do to us? And so in addition to triggering that conversation, catalyze a lot more research around something that's been put into our environment for, almost 100 years, about which there's almost no research about what it does to us or animals and how it affects us. So I felt like we really hit the jackpot as far as like why work this way. Because collaboration across good newsrooms and good reporters makes the information you present not only better and stronger when you have more people thinking about it, but also allows those media companies, whether they're in India or Brazil or Indonesia or Britain, like customize the way to tell that story for the audience in a way that resonates with them, which if we do generically on a global scale, really just can't touch people in the same way. So I had to learn to loosen up my sensibilities about what Orb was going to do and what our media partners were going to do as far as delivering this information to the audiences they serve. And I was rewarded for that. We as an organization were rewarded for it. We as a society were rewarded for it by not trying to control too much, but work in trust and work in collaboration that our partners know what they're doing as well or better than we do. And I think that's really the biggest message, is that when our world is interconnected, and many issues, whether they're environmental or health or frankly business or international entities, multilateral entities, all of these things unfold globally. And if you're focused, in this part of the story, this tiny little bit of it in your country or in your locality, your small area, you're going to miss what is a huge story and happening for a lot of people. And so only through collaboration can we make that happen. And only through that, I think, can we see not only how our world is changing and evolving, sometimes in positive ways and sometimes in negative ways, but the effect of our individual action and behavior. And so, the World Health Organization announced it would do a review of the implications of consuming plastic based on the reporting that we've done. Coca-Cola announced it would be testing Dasani for microplastics. That was the brand that had some of the bottles with the largest density of plastics in them. India and Indonesia separately announced considering different kinds of regulation on bottled water to include the testing for microplastics. And small communities like South Ribble in the UK cited our work when they were having a community discussion about whether to ban single-use plastic in their community. And then individuals just changed their habits. Dads making lunch for kids going to school decided not to use a single-use plastic baggie for the sandwich, right? And so people have changed their habits around the world, and also just raised a lot of awareness around something that that is invisible to us, and in its prevalence has to be affecting us in some way. And I think that for me, that was like the trifecta of media and journalism and quality reporting, which is fact-based information that's scientific, that's fused with human story and human interest and human agency, and that is distributed then in hundreds, maybe even thousands of different ways to reach people in all their different fabulousness around the world, whether that's language or the way they like to consume information. And, just like stats wise, I think, we published in the information was published in at least 30 different languages in more than 100 countries, right? And you could hear the conversation changing over the following months, and it has continued to evolve. And I'm grateful for the people that worked with us that made that happen. I'm proud of the work that we did that instigated that kind of global shift. We're not there yet, but at least we're talking about it.
That's the first step, right? Like first talking, creating awareness, and then taking actions. But correct me if I'm wrong. So it took you 5 years?
We started the research in earnest in the fall of 2016.
Okay.
With the scientists. I first saw the story in the New York Times with the scientists that we ended up working with in 2013. So it was a story that was like in my head for a very long time before we actually started working on it.
That's really fantastic. And to your point, like it's really all about the effort and time, right, that goes into those stories.
Yeah.
But the result, I mean, like that was definitely worth it.
I think so. And, you know, we look forward to continuing to do more work like that. And also, I would say focusing maybe even on solutions and things that are working and working on that kind of scale in order to, you know, uplift and fascinate people about how we can do things that help each other and help ourselves.
And your work is pretty much based on the network of partners, and it's all about, like you said, you gave up of your idea to kind of control everything yourself, and there is a lot of trust in the cooperation with the partners, and therefore you also implemented so-called, it's a tongue twister to me, trust standards.
Right. Yeah.
that allows search engines to kind of identify the sources and the quality, like the origin of content, and that is basically distributed through your partners. Besides the very obvious advantages that those trust standards have, which is quality and origin of content, what kind of benefits would you say are additionally for each party involved?
To have standardized trust.
Exactly.
So I'm hearing kind of two parts to your question, and one is this official like application of the trust indicators, and the second is how you build collaborative relationships that involve trust. There is a little bit of overlap in those, but not necessarily a lot. So the trust indicators, we were lucky, Orb was lucky enough to be chosen to be part of the second cohort of media organizations that were verified by a nonprofit that has developed these trust indicators. And those involve, you know, standardized disclosures about your editorial policies and your ethics and fairness and accuracy, and sort of also your processes. Do you have editors? Do you are your journalists accessible to the public? So that is a set of credentials and standards that we worked with the Trust Project to make sure we were meeting, but also make sure we were getting credit for meeting. And the Trust Project's been working with some of the bigger search engines out there to look to use those digital flags, if you will, to help surface verified quality reporting and information over information that doesn't have that kind of trust indicators embedded in its work. So that's sort of one thing, and it's a great project. I felt very lucky to be in the room with a lot of very big media companies doing this work and shifting their websites, which was a lot harder than ours. And then the second part, I think, is building trust with partners. And, you know, journalism is historically a very like, no, this is mine, I won't share with you, it's my secrets, I'm going to bring them to the world and I'm going to get the scoop and be the hero. And that era really doesn't work. It doesn't work in this era anymore. So interestingly enough, almost all of the partners that we worked with in that first round, actually the second round during 2018, that wanted to partnered with us because they met me in person. And in this era of no travel, part of the things I'm wondering about now is how to build that trust when you haven't at least had that hour-long conversation face-to-face where you can ask hard questions and really use your own gut instinct to decide whether this is a good match for you. Building that trust came from those personal exchanges in a lot of cases. And then secondly, not being defensive. and being willing to be vulnerable. So, you know, the story that we wanted to break about the bottled water and the research that we had, you know, it needs to be right. It needs to be accurate. It needs to be real. And we were running forward with research that hadn't been, what do you call it? Peer reviewed, hadn't been peer reviewed yet. So instead of saying, no, you have to publish it the way it is and you can't ask us any questions, we actually just sort of opened our doors to our media partners and the journalists that were working on that project with us and the editors, and said, you know, here's the research, here's the scientists we've interviewed, here's this, here are the weaknesses and shortcomings we see. Do you have any ways to fill those? What do you see that we should modify? And that partnership is what built the trust. Being able to work openly with them and say, we don't think we have all the answers. We have confidence in our work, and we think what we've done is very high quality reporting and research. And we want to make sure that you're satisfied with it so that you can bring it to your public with the sense of integrity and confidence that it's important and it's real. And so that openness, I think, is what made the trust in working with those partners possible in a business where if you mess up once, you can lose your integrity and credibility for the rest of your career, you know, as an individual, and as an industry, as a business. Also, obviously, scandals and stuff don't help the business of media companies. So by extension, they were trusting, you know, our reporting and then verifying it themselves in ways that made them comfortable to bring it to their audiences. So that was a long answer, but trust is a complicated thing.
Oh yeah, that's true. Where do you see opportunities in the future for quality and investigative journalism? And maybe if there is a reason why. Yeah,
I think we've talked around this a little bit already, but for sure, collaboration. I think both from an economic perspective of where media is today and how challenged it is financially as a business model has crumbled, is falling apart. So looking for efficiencies economically is part of why collaboration makes sense. And then the bigger reason from my mind, because I'm a journalist, not a business person, is that some of the issues that are the most important issues of our time are transnational issues where no one community or country can fix them. And so without collaboration as human society on those issues, we won't be able to fix them. And if we as journalists are not showing a holistic image through the information we present of how we're connected and how we can collaborate and how we have a shared interest in collaborating to solve some of those issues, whether it's, you know, the spread of pandemics, whether it's climate change, whether it's, you know, educational capacities and skills and learning from each other about how to raise children who can be the next generation in this planet, we're not going to be able to solve them. So I think that collaboration on a news level, newsroom level, that helps tie those disparate experiences of something similar together for audiences all around the world in ways they can relate to, I think that's magic. I think it's magic for newsrooms. I think it's magic for social change. I think it's magic for consumers who want to feel agency, that they have a role in shaping what the future looks like. And I think that newsrooms can really improve their engagement and how to serve the public by working together with other newsrooms on those issues.
And which advice would you give somebody who's kind of young and really wants to kind of start out in this area, like working as a journalist, investigative journalist, like you? What kind of advice would you give that young person?
I